I assume dramming culture isn't still happening now.
No. And I think that at Bowmore we were the first company actually to stop it in the mid-80s. And while we got a lot of criticism for it, nevertheless, it wasn't too long before the families were thanking us for what we did. Well, because basically what was happening was that on a Friday night they would be getting a dram from the brewer and get their wages at the same time and down to the pub, and before you knew what happened, they'd split the wage packet, and unless the wife was down there pretty PDQ, the whole wage packet was drunk.
Welcome back to the Whisky Legends podcast, where I speak to my granddad Tim Morrison about how the industry has developed over the last 100 years. In this episode, we hear about his time on the production line, his favourite and least favourite jobs, the lack of health and safety, and some of the perks of working in whisky in the 60s. If you have any feedback or questions you'd like featured in future series, please leave them in the ratings or our YouTube and social channels, which you can find in the description. Okay, so last episode we heard the background, what the industry was like, sort of pre you coming into it, how your father started to grow the business. What did the industry look like when you came into it, and you were sort of, how old would you have been then?
I would be 19.
19 years old.
Yeah. And 19. And what did the industry look like? Well, the industry was very active both in Glasgow and in Edinburgh and in London. And, you know, quite a number of brokers down in London. But those were the three centres of the whisky industry, those three cities.
Yeah, and similar sort of brands at this point to the ones you mentioned last time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And, I mean, obviously, you came in at 18. Did you always, I mean, we sort of established you didn't have an infatuation from childhood or anything like that, but did you kind of know or always know you wanted to join the industry?
Well, I left school when 18, and I was then faced with what are we going to do? And my father didn't put any pressure on me, but he said, if you're interested, I'll speak to somebody and you can get a training with one of the companies. And so he spoke to John MacPhail of Arthur Bell, and as a consequence of that, it was arranged that I would go and do my training with them for 8 months.
So you didn't have any other, you know, you wanted to be a doctor or
absolutely none.
A car salesman, a sportsman.
No. I think I'd have fallen on my face in all other aspects.
And why was that?
While interested in cars, I didn't think that was something I wanted to get involved in. In fact, I really didn't have a clue as to what I wanted to do. And this, if you like, was an easy option. So off I went up to Buckie, and it was snowing and I was cold, but was warmly welcomed by the staff and the manager at Inchgour Distillery.
And they were part of
Arthur Bell's, yeah. Inchgour Whisky went into the Bell's blend, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And so what was your first role when you were there? As a maltster, followed then going on to the mashing, and finally into the still house. Did you have a favourite job on the production line?
Did I have a favourite job? I would say that being involved in the malting side of the business was something that interested me, because I just felt that we were dealing with a living object. It was interesting to see a floor being laid, for instance, on the Monday, and it coming to fruition, so to speak, going to the kiln on a Friday.
Yeah, you were in touch with your
yes, I mean,
natural side.
That's right, and it was physically quite hard because you were shoveling malt to aerate it on the malting floors, and that actually, from my point of view, was quite good because it kept you fit and
good mindfulness.
Good mindfulness, and but the other thing was it would go from the upside of turning the floors to the downside of clearing the kilns.
Why was the kiln so bad?
Because it was a concentrated heat chamber. And
that doesn't sound ideal.
No, it wasn't. And so consequently, the heat in there would be, I suppose, up there in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And of course, you're working and you're stripping this barley and it's dust and gets in your face and your eyes. And
so this was the production line, basically.
Yeah.
And did your dad say, look, I recommend you do this and put you on a certain path, or did you kind of...
basically he said, look, here is something you might consider. I can organise a training programme for you. Do it, complete it, and then when you're finished, see where you want to go.
So was there set jobs on the production line, or did you kind of rotate? Or?
We rotated round, except I rotated more than most because
you were the young one.
Yeah. We used to clean the washbacks, which today would never be allowed because basically what happens is you go into the washbacks and you have to be very, very careful that there's no carbon dioxide still lingering in the washbacks. Otherwise, that's the end of you.
Yeah, so health and safety wasn't a priority for you.
Never knew anything about health and safety.
And how did you test whether there was carbon dioxide? People just started passing out? Or?
Well, hopefully that somebody who was doing the hosing and cleaning it before we went in to sweep it, because you were given great big long brushes, and then you swept these washbacks, and that was quite a job. And then they would put sodium as a cleanser.
Lots of nice chemicals then.
Oh, great. Yeah. Fantastic, yeah.
And you must have been in serious shape afterwards.
Well, indeed, because at the same time I had the opportunity of playing rugby.
Okay.
And then in the summer playing cricket.
Must have been knackered. Finish your shift malting and cleaning washbacks and then off to rugby.
Well, fortunately we were, you worked every... 1 weekend out of 3.
Okay. And what were the hours like? Would you...
You would start at 7 and finish at 6.
7 in the morning, 6 in the evening.
Yeah.
And there were night shifts as well? Or?
Indeed there was, which was awful.
Yeah. And how many people were sort of working on the production line at any one time?
About 20, 23, 24.
Yeah. And is that similar to now?
Oh no, gosh no, there's quarter of that number.
Yeah.
Because we used to have people in the malt barns, we'd have in the mash tun area, mashing, and then fermentation, and then distillation. But then, of course, you had a group working in the warehouses as well.
Yeah.
So you had quite a big workforce in those days.
And were you quite social with them? Did people go out after work, or were you got on well just during work?
Yeah.
And then people went back to their families?
Their families. Because basically in those days, everybody worked in the distillery, stayed in distillery houses.
Right, okay.
And but the distillery managers, or rather the manager of the Bell's distilleries up there, his son was a keen cricketer and a keen rugby player. So
you got on well with him?
Yeah.
Because I can't even go into the office in London without being dragged to some after work drinks, and
Really?
that writes you off the next day. But I guess that's a bit harder if you have to climb into a kiln
Oof.
the day after. Did they at least get a little whiskey on the way out?
Well, of course, in those days they had the dramming, and that meant that each shift that came off were offered a dram of new spirit or maybe slightly older spirit, and that
every day.
Yeah, that was prevalent in the industry.
Yeah, and how big were these drams?
Oh gosh, probably a decent glass. I was fortunate that I didn't like the stuff, so I was fairly fortunate because I would give mine to somebody else. To remember the older Cooperage boys or something like that.
Quite popular then.
Well, I don't know about that, but it was certainly an enjoyable environment.
Yeah. I assume dramming culture isn't still happening now.
No. And I think that at Bowmore we were the first company actually to stop it in the mid-80s. And while we got a lot of criticism for it, nevertheless, it wasn't too long before the families were thanking us for what we did. Yeah.
Why? Because
basically what was happening was that on a Friday night they would be getting a dram from the brewer and then get their wages at the same time and down to the pub, and before you knew what happened, they'd split the wage packet, and unless the wife was down there pretty PDQ, the whole wage packet was drunk.
I have to admit, I'm bad for that when I get paid on a Friday. Luckily, I don't have a wife though, so it's okay. Okay, so you had about eight months then on the production line?
8 months on with Arthur Bell.
Yeah, and then where were you next?
Then I went to Leith, to their blending and bottling warehouses, which were situated in the centre of Leith.
And that was Bell's warehouses?
Well, yeah.
And what were your roles there then?
I was involved in the administration, but at the same time I had to go on the bottling lines, and I had to shovel casks, and I had to fill up the lines with either labels or cartons or bottles, depending what was. So it was pretty thorough, the jobs that I were given.
And you mentioned there's a quarter of the staff now on the production line. Is Absolutely. It similar with the warehouse Absolutely. And bottling as well?
Sure.
Was there a lot of it done by hand then? Or?
Oh, most of it was done by... Not most of it. The big brands were fairly automated, mm-hmm. but the smaller brands, it was, shoving it underneath the thing and pushing it along, next one, shoving it along and what have you.
And what about the labels and stuff, putting them on by hand?
Yeah, absolutely.
Crikey, that would have taken a while.
Oh, not only taken a while, but quality control was a problem.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Were there ever any big sort of blunders that you saw?
Oh yeah, I mean, cases going out without labels on them, and which was almost common. Mm-hmm. And then you see what also happened was if you were doing a liquid glue, you had to let the bottles rest for the glue to dry, because then what would happen? Some guy along at the end of them with the cases there would pick the bottle up and stick it into the dividers. The label is still wet, and it would just collapse on itself. So the poor distributor or importer would get these cases of whiskey where the label was just, it was quality control was
quality control, and I guess there was more room for other mistakes. Did you ever have any big errors that cost the company or anything like that?
No, you would see the odd tractor take the wrong road and tip up a carton of bottles or something like that, which didn't go down too well.
Yeah. So they weren't getting their pay that month.
Well, I don't know how they punished them, but
Maybe no dram at the end of the day for a while.
well, I think that funny enough, actually, I think in the bottling halls, I don't think they got dramming. I suppose they must have. Probably once a week, the end of the week.
Or they slip the odd one in their bag.
Yeah.
Before putting it
Well,
in the
yeah,
case.
I mean, this security was could be pretty lax.
Yeah.
And security was basically customs and excise, rather than actually companies having their own security.
Yeah. And so, was it similar sort of people at the warehouse? There wasn't many your age in terms of socialising and things like that?
No. Unlike up in the distilleries, because there were quite a number of people like me who were doing training programs in other companies. So I met a lot.
You met all those guys?
Yeah.
Are you still friendly with them now?
Well, if they're alive.
Yeah.
But the other thing was that the Customs and Excise had a system whereby their young officers who had just come out of university, they were sent up to Speyside or to distilleries.
And Custom and Excise is...
Well, that's the body that levies the tax on...
So the government, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And these guys were of a similar background to us, and some played cricket, some played rugby, some socialised, and it was quite sociable up that part of the world in those days.
Yeah.
You know, up in Elgin and Forres and Aberdeen to an extent, but Grandtown. No, I met a lot of people at that time, and it was fun, but at the same time, very hard work.
Yeah, but worth it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so obviously you joined SPM at some point, but there was another role before you joined your father's company.
Well, I went to work for the North British
That's
Distillery,
it, yeah.
situated beside Murrayfield.
It's quite a nice place for a place to be situated.
Well, indeed, because in those days you could actually see into Murrayfield, and then in the warehouses, they looked onto Hearts football ground.
All right, perfect.
Oh,
So when games were on, the distillery managers thinking, where the hell is
on
everyone?
the way up and have a wander and watch Hearts, and of course in those days the game started at 2:00 because there was no floodlighting.
Right.
So
Middle of the day.
yeah,
Was that basically
skive off.
the lunch break, or was it just...
It was after lunch,
yeah,
but you didn't abuse it.
yeah,
You didn't abuse it.
yeah. So your role at North British, what were you doing there?
It was working in the distillery, working in the warehouses, and rolling casks around the place. God knows how many casks I must have rolled in the distilleries up north and in Leith and at the North British, because of course you're dealing with a production that is 8 times the size of a malt distillery. So you're...
Oh yeah, because it's a grain distillery, North
Yeah,
British, isn't it? Yeah.
So you're moving casks around to a fair degree.
Yeah. And who were they mostly going to?
They would be going... The North British Distillery was owned by the industry, by the independents, not the DCL, but the independents. People like Bell's, MacDonald and Muir, Highland Distilleries, Robertson and Baxter, and so they were filling for those companies. because it was set up because the other grain distilleries were owned by DCL, Distillers Company Limited, and there was concern that they might cut off the supply of grain whisky. So that's how the North British Distillery was set up.
All right. And do you always have a sort of special place in your heart for these distilleries? You remember them fondly?
Oh, very, very, yeah.
It's funny that North British is one, because that is one of the first whiskies that I remember thinking, bloody hell, that's incredible. You know, before that, I guess when I was first getting into it, maybe, 5 or 6 years ago now, and thinking when I heard people talking about notes of bubble gum and tasting sea air, I was like, what a load of shit that is.
Yeah.
But then I tried that AD Ratchery North British, and it was literally like bubble gum flavour. I was like, wow, that's incredible. And that bottle went very quickly, and now I've looked and you don't have any more, unfortunately. But so coincidence there as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
In our next episode, we'll find out what it was like in the 60s touring the UK as a whiskey broker. We'll also hear about my granddad's first trip to the US and Canada with his father to cement relationships with the major families and businesses there, as well as his first tour of South America. If you have any feedback or questions you'd like featured in future series, please leave them in the ratings or our YouTube and social channels, which you can find in the description.